It is Tuesday, April 18th. Welcome to the Sheldon MacLeod Show here on News 95.7. Glad to have a bit of your time today. A bright, sunny afternoon, a little bit chilly. Hoping for a turn in the weather. We're going to be chatting with Joe Murphy, blues legend, coming up a little later on this hour. Also, Chef Live, Richard Julian. We'll hear from Amy Graves from Get Prescription Drugs Off the Street. And the Dr. Sarah Jones court case continues today. This was a doctor accused of writing prescriptions for thousands, tens of thousands of opioid pills to a patient who testified in court that they had received none of them. But some of that testimony, some of what she gave as a statement to Doctors Nova Scotia? Yeah, it was not admissible in court. So we're going to talk a bit about that with Amy. That's coming up in a little bit. But right now, we're taking our conversation to the marijuana legalization versus decriminalization conversation. One of the big headlines in today's Chronicle Herald, Liberals say no plan for conviction amnesty. It's a Canadian press story saying the federal government plan to legalize recreational marijuana does not include general amnesty for any past pot convictions, something that some people say they'd like to see. Our next guest, well, she's written an op-ed piece as well. The Liberals have lied that their pot plan is not legalization. In fact, she's describing it as Prohibition 2.0. And Jodie Emery is our guest. She's here on the radio with us this afternoon. Jodie Emery, thanks again for joining us. Your court case still on for later this week?
Yes, on Friday I'll be in court in Toronto for our first appearance on these recent charges.
Those are for what, distribution of marijuana?
Well, we started last April a retail storefront model of what legalization should look like. So yes, it's related to these cannabis culture storefronts that were opened up after many, many years of not being involved in marijuana sales whatsoever. But yes, we did open up retail stores, and we were proud to do so, and we were arrested and charged with conspiracy and some other serious offenses that carry very long sentences up to life in prison.
As we know, there's a leadership race underway for the Conservative Party of Canada. I think it was Kelly Leitch who said, well, if she was elected, if she becomes a prime minister, she would reverse course. I don't know if you would go that far, but you're certainly not in favor of what this government proposed last week with its legalization legislation.
Well, I'm concerned because it doesn't actually seem to legalize at all. The three primary reasons Canadians support legalization is that, for one, tens of thousands, if not millions, of Canadians in history have received criminal records for marijuana when they have been harmless, peaceful people who hurt no one, and those criminal records are unjust and cause them harm. The second reason is because we acknowledge that marijuana is already here. It's already grown and sold. It's worth billions. Millions of Canadians use it. So we should stop criminalizing what already exists. And Justice Department statistics do show that 95% of growers are law-abiding, peaceful citizens, not gangsters. And the third reason for legalization was to stop wasting police resources and time going after people for marijuana when we have murders and theft and assaults and an opiate crisis where people are actually being killed, and that's where police should focus. But this legislation does not address any of those concerns. It continues to criminalize Canadians by arresting them every day from now on forward. It continues to ignore the idea of pardons and amnesty, which means they don't want to acknowledge that prohibition was unjust. It continues to criminalize the existing industry. So if you grow marijuana and sell it or have a storefront, you're going to jail for even harsher penalties and sentences than before. And the police are keeping their marijuana budgets and even asking for more money to enforce marijuana law. So how is this legalization? For whom?
Jodie Emery is our guest here today. We know that the Prime Minister says the law is the law. The laws about possessing marijuana today are no different than they were a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, even though there is pending legislation. But the idea that we have to wait until that legislation is in Parliament, is passed, and all of the other mechanisms are in place, that it's just it's a matter of, we're told, months, maybe more than a year. Why not wait? Why not hold off? Why not just say, okay, fine, at least these are steps towards what many people say has been a long time coming?
Well, the Liberals didn't want to legalize marijuana. In fact, Trudeau originally supported decriminalization. He said it was wrong to arrest people and spend money charging them when his own late brother had been arrested, and he said that's wrong. But then he changed his tune and says the law is the law. But we need to look at whether the law is just. It's good to have laws that say you can't murder people or steal from them. That's because there are victims there and actual harm. But prohibition is a law that manufactures crime where it wouldn't exist otherwise. If they made coffee illegal tomorrow, we would all be criminals and they could arrest us. But that law would not be just. And when we look at the marijuana laws that exist today in Canada, the medical marijuana laws, those only exist because patients and growers and dispensaries got arrested, went to court, and won. And Health Canada admits they only provide marijuana access because the courts have ordered them to do so under the charter. So these companies that exist today for marijuana that's legal for medical use only exist because people broke the law and used civil disobedience. Remember that shopping on Sunday used to be illegal, and even abortion was illegal. But Dr. Henry Morgentaler won the Order of Canada for his work breaking the law to demonstrate the injustice of the law, which helped to change the law. And that's why activists have been doing civil disobedience for decades. So when people tell us to just sit back and wait, we've been waiting decades, and I have no patience for injustice, and the Liberals are only following through on this reluctantly, like every other time the Liberal governments and Conservative governments have before opposed marijuana. They don't want to do it, but they're just trying to commit to one of their election promises, but they're messing it up very badly, and many Canadians will continue to be criminalized because of it.
I heard Bill Blair in an interview, though, say that when this conversation was started here in Canada, that they were moving towards recreational legalization, that jurisdictions like Washington and Colorado reached out to government officials in the task force to say, you know what, we rushed into it and we made mistakes. We don't want you to repeat our mistakes. And perhaps that's part of the reason for government's reluctance to just turn the switch and make it legal today. Do you buy that argument?
No, I think it's just political cowardice. When you actually look at the states where marijuana is legal or any jurisdictions, there are no problems increased. Some will say, well, more drivers who are in crashes test positive for marijuana, but the fact is they started testing people where they didn't before. So naturally, they're going to find people they hadn't found before. But the marijuana was consumed weeks ago and shows up weeks later. So it actually isn't impairment. So these statistics that are being cited from Washington and Colorado are actually being spun and skewed. If you look at the U.S. government, they did a massive study, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and they found that marijuana users are no more likely to crash than those who don't use marijuana. But because of all this fear, because of all this reefer madness, we've had decades of the government telling us to be afraid of the marijuana. So, of course, people are naturally going to be cautious and tepid and afraid, but they shouldn't be. We should be comparing marijuana to the other substances for what it actually is. And we can show demonstrably that marijuana is safer than alcohol for people who want to relax and unwind. And it's safer than the opiates and pharmaceuticals that doctors have been pushing on people, and which you touched on before this interview. These opiates are actually causing devastation when people have a safer alternative. So it's important to, quote unquote, get it right or take it slow. I understand that. But remember that marijuana prohibition is supposed to be ending because it's an injustice and a waste and a crime against civil liberties to punish peaceful people for making a free choice to use something that's safer than alcohol or pharmaceuticals. So we have to acknowledge that, but most governments do not want to admit that they wrongly arrested 2 million Canadians, that they wasted billions of dollars in law enforcement going after people for pot. They don't want to admit that they did that, and they want to continue doing the same into the future So they try and justify it all by saying that marijuana is dangerous and something to be afraid of, when really the science shows it's far safer than most everything out there the government pushes and profits from already.
As you say, you describe it as Prohibition 2.0, and I think you've laid out pretty much why you feel that way. Jodie, thank you for the time this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you for the chance to talk. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. Jodie Emery, pot activist, a co-founder of the Cannabis Culture Pot Shops, and as she says, her court case comes this Friday based on a raid or a crackdown on the dispensaries that have popped up across the country. And, of course, CBC reporting that someone, through investigative reporting, made a connection between organized crime and dispensaries. I don't think they said Jodie Emery's dispensaries, but, yeah. Who was it? Goofbag who says I talk more about pot than Rick Howe talks about Cornwallis. Really? But hopefully, though, to take this as an educational opportunity. Well, not so much the Jodie Emery, but how to talk to your kids about this. I think that's important. We're going to talk to someone with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation in just a few seconds.